Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Huw Fullerton.
My name is Morgan Jeffrey.
And this week we're talking all about a classic New Who two-parter starring David Tennant and Freema Agyeman, Human Nature / Family of Blood. Now, if you're a Doctor Who fan who's following stuff online, you may detect why we've picked that two-parter specifically. Obviously, there's been a lot of episode rewatches of Doctor Who episodes from the last 15 years or so, and this is one of the ones that is coming up, or if you're listening to this later, happened and we all really enjoyed. Very time travel-y. So we thought this would be a great time to kind of revisit an episode that, I think we're both really big fans of, and that is a really, great episode of Doctor Who. And it's also an episode, Morgan, that has a bit of an interesting backstory, doesn't it, compared to others?
It does, Huw, yes, because Human Nature, for those of you who don't know, the TV episode was based on a novel that was originally published in 1995 by Virgin under their New Adventures range, and originally featured the 7th Doctor rather than the 10th. I think for fans who like everything, not just all the TV episodes, but books and audio, all of it to fit under one roof, this one's a little bit of a challenge to explain why Human Nature happened twice. But the novel at the time was hugely popular. It was voted Doctor Who fans' favourite New Adventures novel. So I guess when Doctor Who did return to television and they were sort of looking at some of the spin-off media that had been produced during the Wilderness years, if they were looking for a story to adapt, this one must have jumped to the top of the pile immediately. I mean, it wasn't actually technically the first Doctor Who story from another medium to be adapted for television, because Dalek from Series 1 is very loosely based on the writer Rob Shearman's Big Finish release, Jubilee. But this is a far more faithful adaptation of the book.
And that same series we had Blink, which was obviously an adaptation of a short story that Stephen Moffat had done before. So
The Lodger as well later on was based on a Doctor Who magazine comic strip, I believe.
With
there have been with Mickey in place of James Corden, so there have been a few, but I'd say
it's uncommon.
It's relatively uncommon, and Human Nature is definitely the most renowned, I would say.
Yeah. So for anyone who has slightly forgotten what the episode about, basically the Doctor and Martha are trying to escape from these aliens who want to steal his sort of regenerative powers. So the Doctor uses a chameleon arch, something that people will have seen recently again in the Jodie Whittaker Doctor Who episodes, to become human. A guy called John Smith, who has, a great sort of subtextual knowledge of real life Doctor Who, because he thinks his parents were Sydney and Verity.
Yes.
And then he basically hangs out at school a bit before World War One, 1914, 13?
I believe so.
Something like that. And he teaches history, funnily enough. And basically just hangs out with the school nurse, played by Jessica Hines, falls in love. And then the family turn up, they start possessing people and causing all sorts of a ruckus. And then, John Smith has to become the Doctor again to fight them. But wait, his magic watch isn't there. Oh no, what's he going to do? There's some great actors in it. Some actors who went on to bigger things as well. Harry Lloyd, who people know from Game of Thrones and from many other films and TV shows, plays Baines / Son of Mine, who is definitely the MVP of the Family of Blood. The other three are playing it quite straight. It's like, oh, I'm a bit evil, and he goes, bah, bah, bah.
I mean, the Family of Blood in this story are great antagonists, I think, but Harry Lloyd definitely stands out as Son of Mine, because it's a slightly odd, slightly mannered performance, but I actually think it's a brilliant performance. I know he certainly impressed a lot of people at the time. Russell T Davies sort of earmarked him as a possible future Doctor, as did Stephen Moffat, I believe, who suggested he would be a great choice, which I don't disagree with.
Yeah, and also we had Thomas Brodie Sangster of Love Actually. That was already a while in the past. It was like, oh, the Love Actually kid's gotten older, and now obviously the Love Actually kid has gotten significantly older and been in the Maze Runner films and things like that. But yeah, he's
also Game of Thrones.
And also gave a good point. I forgot about that. Yeah, I mean, probably, to be honest, let's not stop counting how many people in Doctor Who episodes have been in Game of Thrones.
How many British actors have been in Game of Thrones?
Yeah, and for fans of The Crown, obviously Pip Torrens is the future Tommy Lashl's. He plays the head teacher in this episode, and he lives quite near where my parents live in Cardiff, so sometimes they see him out and about. So there's a little
good trivia,
little slice of trivia for you. Not anymore, not currently. Don't see him out much at the moment. So yeah, no, it's a great episode, and I'm kind of saying episode when I mean 2 episodes, because obviously this is a 2-parter, Human Nature and Family of Blood, but they feel particularly cohesive. Obviously, Doctor Who 2-parters often do feel quite cohesive, but I kind of think of it all as one story, right? Yeah, and sorry, Karen.
No, I was just going to say, like, and it is very cohesive. I think it's one of the best 2-parters as well. I don't think the 2-parter is the easiest format to nail. Sometimes they can end up feeling like you could have done that story justice in 45 minutes. But I think that this is a story that very much justifies its runtime. I don't think the emotional impact of part 2 would have been quite the same if you hadn't had that degree of setup with the first episode.
Definitely. And I mean, it basically is, you can sum it up as the first episode is the Doctor has become a human, and we kind of learn about that. And then it's like, this human has to become the Doctor is kind of the thing of the other one. It's like a peak and a trough. And it's really, really interesting. And it's, like you said, it's one of the more emotional episodes in kind of interesting way, because it's not just a beloved character has died, or we've seen, a nice character we've just met has died. Do you know what I mean? It's more complex. Like the Doctor's having to give something up that isn't just, a normal, oh yeah, I'm waving goodbye to a friend, which is something you see quite often in the series. The Doctor is, well, someone who's not quite the Doctor is having to give up their entire life to save the Doctor and save the world in a weird sort of way. But
and
very strange.
And John Smith, the Doctor's sort of human alter ego, is an invention, really. He's not real in inverted commas, but then it poses a lot of interesting questions, because his thoughts were real and some of his experiences were real, and his love for Joan, Jessica Hines' character, was real. So in a sense, to become the Doctor again, John Smith does die, which is a very dark idea. He kind of has to take his own life so that the Doctor can live. And I've even seen some speculation online that having gone through that death as John Smith is part of the reason why the 10th Doctor is particularly eager later on to avoid regeneration, which is another kind of death and rebirth.
That's a good point. I've not thought of that. I mean, I definitely like that we're kind of making up reasons for why he was so mopey about it in that incarnation, whereas Matt Smith was like, yeah, it doesn't matter, I'll be back. So it's also an episode which is quite interesting, I think, because you mentioned, there's some canon stuff there. What is canon, what isn't? This is very specific, but there's a bit in it that is about the Doctor and pears, right?
Yes, I picked up on this.
Yeah, it's because in the Paul Cornell book, the Doctor doesn't like pears, and that's like a throwaway gag, and he writes it into the episode in the Doctor's list of rules. And you can actually watch the full list of rules on YouTube, I think. There's a deleted scene, because they basically, in the episode, Martha speeds past it. So the Doctor adds a few more rules and then starts speaking as David Tennant just to fill time, and starts talking about a gig he went to, and then he segues back into the main thing. But anyway, the thing that doesn't make the episode is that he doesn't like pears. So there was this sort of long debate in certain corners of the fandom, at least as I understood it, about whether the Doctor did or didn't like pears in his incarnation, because the 7th Doctor didn't like pears in
a spin-off book.
Yeah, but
and the 10th Doctor doesn't like pears, but only in a deleted scene.
Yes, exactly. But it is somewhat canonized that different versions of a Doctor don't like pears, because Peter Capaldi's 12th Doctor comments on it in his final speech, his last scene in the role, his triumphant exit. He says, "Don't remember to never ever eat pears."
There's a lot of confusing. Yeah, there's a lot of debate, and there's been lots of questioning about what is canon, and fans argue about it back and forth. But I think the most important thing is that we settled that at long last, that the Doctor does not like pears. That debate can at last be put to bed. Until,
Series 13, Jodie Whittaker takes a big bite out of a pear, and everyone goes, "Oh, they're rewriting canon."
Chip, no!
I mean, we should mention that, actually, because we alluded to the fact that some of the stuff from Human Nature and Family of Blood has cropped up in the series again recently. I mean, in a really surprising way as well, because the Chameleon Arch was a really cool twist, a really cool idea, which is why it ends up being fed into the arc of that series, right? Because, I mean, that is how John Sims' master, or Derek Jacobi's master then, is hiding, and it becomes this great twist. And because it's been set up in a story that I think you'd think of as non-archy, if you get what I mean. Like, you wouldn't think of Human Nature and Family of Blood as, like, important to the arc. The Doctor's emotional arc, but not, the sort of overall series thing, the Mr. Saxon arc. But obviously it does feed into it. And then we haven't seen the chameleon arc since, I don't think, at all, for quite a long time. And then suddenly it crops up again in, Fugitive of the Jadoon. And I loved that. I thought it was so cool. It kind of did take me back to watching, not this episode, but the Utopia Sound of Drums thing, where it's like, oh my God, there's another one. And it was like that. And I was like, oh my God, there's another one. And I was a bit like, will everyone remember what the Chameleon Arch did?
Well, it's funny now with stuff like that, because it's been a little while, right, since these episodes aired. So it's almost, bringing back something like the Chameleon Arch in Fugitive of the Jadoon that was last seen in Utopia. That's almost the equivalent of 2005, 2006, 2007 era Doctor Who bringing back something from the classic series at this point. Like the time is not, totally sort of incomparable in that way. So yeah, and it's kind of fascinating that what originated in a spin-off book in 1995 not only went on to be adapted for television and then play a massive part in the series arc of the television series for Series 3, but then is brought back again and is still having these ramifications in Series 12.
I think that just shows when you latch onto something that's a good idea in Doctor Who, it does just have legs. Like Paul Cornell came up with, that idea of the Chameleon Arch, and it's just such a sort of interesting and evocative idea of the Doctor becoming human, or a Doctor becoming human. Like, for the big twist of like this ordinary person is actually hugely significant, which is always a fun twist, but even they don't know about it. It's like being, under deep cover, like a sleeper agent, but also then for stories like Human Nature, Family of Blood, where it adds this sort of great emotional journey to the Doctor that is just the sort of thing that would not be possible in any other show. Do you know what I mean? Like I said, you could have a show where like you'd be sad someone's leaving, like Parks and Recreation has episode where they're sad someone's leaving, just like the Doctor was sad Rose left. Parks and Recreation couldn't have an episode where Leslie turns out to be someone else entirely.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well that Doctor Who, I think, by outsiders, is often mischaracterized as being, I don't know quite what the word is, but it's almost like pure sci-fi. It's for real nerds, and those are the only people who can enjoy Doctor Who. But I think actually Doctor Who is at its best when it's at its most emotional and even romantic. Dare I say it? Yeah, like some of my favorite episodes are stories like this, or like Girl in the Fireplace, which have that great mixture of romance and tragedy. I think that's something that the modern show in particular does very well.
I think you're right, and I think, talking about the impact this episode has, remember that in The End of Time, one of the only people, the Doctor revisits all his companions plus Jessica Hines from this episode. Like that's
or at least her descendant. Yeah.
Yes, like that's how important this whole thing is to the 10th Doctor, which is crazy, really, when you think about it. But yeah, no, it's definitely, like you said, it's definitely one of the emotional ones. I think it's one of the episodes, like we said, you couldn't really have it in another show. Like I can't really imagine getting that kind of storyline, and it kind of works because there's that intersection of like relatable storytelling and sci-fi, which you don't have in so many shows. And
I think as well, it's debatable whether it would have worked as well with another Doctor, which is ironic given that it was originally written as a story for the 7th Doctor. I mean, I can't quite imagine Sylvester McCoy romancing Jessica Hines on screen, but who knows? It might have been fantastic. But I think David Tennant's Doctor is sort of one of the more human and one of the, ironically, and one of the more romantic. So to see him go through this, I think it's more impactful in a way. It kind of hits home a little bit more.
But you mentioned The Girl in the Fireplace, and I think if you add Doomsday to that, this Doctor has kind of given up love, before. We've seen him do it, and I think having him do it again from a different perspective, but giving up also a normal life kind of, is just adds that. Yeah, I can't really imagine it working with Peter Capaldi's Doctor or Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. Like, it just doesn't feel right, because you kind of don't have those. I mean, you do have a little with Peter Capaldi and River Song, I suppose, but you don't really have those kind of romances.
And I suppose what we see, the life we see the Doctor living as John Smith with Joan is kind of like the logical conclusion to what the idea that was first introduced with Rose, both the character and the episode. Yeah, but the new series is very much played on the Doctor companion relationship as being like a romance. Yeah. Whether it be a fully fledged romance or a unrequited love with Martha, or and so this is kind of a logical extension of that, of what would it actually look like if the Doctor, as you say, were to settle down.
Yeah.
And ultimately the tragedy of it is he never can.
We should also talk a little bit about, this is sort of talked about as one of the darker episodes in Doctor Who. It's interesting because it's not like a scary episode. The Scarecrows are a bit scary, but it's not like a hugely scary episode. It's just some of the themes are quite dark. I mean, obviously, it's one of, not the first time the show addresses racism, but it's one of the first times we see people being kind of racist towards Martha, in that, like, some of the boys kind of tease her, and even Joan, who's like a kind of good character, sort of says, oh, certainly, you wouldn't be allowed to be a doctor anytime. And also we see there's that great bit in Family of Blood where the boys are, shooting at the scarecrows, which they've been training to do, and they start playing this hymn of the boys singing in Sunday school, and then you're kind of really getting this flash forward to, in a few years, they're going to be stuck in the trenches and, facing this terrible thing. And I think, it's a weird, in a good weird mix of stuff, but it definitely hits on some adult themes in quite a subtle way, and it's not all about them. They're just sort of there.
Yeah, no, it's definitely scary can mean a lot of different things, but I think it's definitely one of the more sort of psychologically unsettling episodes, because it does have those themes of death and racism and war and heartbreak, which are quite big adult themes to be tackling at roughly 7 o'clock on a Saturday night on BBC One. And I think even Russell T Davies himself might have sort of suggested that maybe they went a little too dark, but I think it works because although it is delving into some pretty mature themes, on the flip side you've got these big colourful antagonists and you've got scarecrows coming to life, and I think it works in the way Doctor Who often works well, in that those themes are there if you want to see them, but if not, it still works as a kind of rollicking good adventure. I don't think it gets lost in its themes, especially.
No, I get what you mean. We should also talk a little bit about the fury of the Time Lord segment, which is a fan favourite. I mean, there's a few fan favourite bits from this episode. There's that description of the Doctor, of him, burning at the centre of time and all that stuff, which is really, really great. I probably should have written it down so I could read it out. But I don't think I'd deliver it quite as well as Thomas Brodie Sangster anyway. But that's a really great description. But then also we see this dark side to the Doctor. He freezes Son of Mine in time, makes him a scarecrow. He locks, Father of Mine in chains from a collapsing Jupiter moon or something.
Something like that.
He kicks the Mother of Mine into a black hole or a collapsing star, I think, and then he traps the little girl in the mirror. It's all very sort of dark and sort of cruel and sort of appropriate,
and quite this is a phrase that's often given to the 5th series of Doctor Who, Stephen Moffat's first, but it's quite fairy tale. This idea of he trapped her in a black hole and he trapped her in a mirror, and chains
every mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at the corner of your eye. And the reason I brought that up as well is that Paul Cornell recently obviously wrote a story starring Jodie Whittaker's Doctor about her being stuck in lockdown, and she mentions this. She mentions that she once trapped a little girl in the mirror, and she feels a bit bad about that and thinks maybe she should go and let her out, because she said that's not really who she is anymore. So she feels like that isn't the sort of thing she would do. Which is kind of interesting, because it is quite cruel. I mean, the little girl, I don't really know how little she really is, if she's an alien, but it's a bit ambiguous.
Maybe she's like Baby Yoda and she's actually 50 years old.
That's true, maybe, yeah, maybe. And she's certainly pretty nasty. I think she did kill the headmaster.
Yeah, so maybe the 13th Doctor's going a bit soft on her, I think,
Yeah, softer on her old 2000, however old age, 10 billion, however old the Doctor is now. But yeah, no, it's an interesting episode. One of the interesting things about it as well is that it's one of the episodes that people do talk about, and we actually ran a poll a couple of years ago where I think it won. I think it was something to do with it was the most popular David Tennant episode. I think we were sort of breaking stuff up by Doctor. I can't quite remember. Please do correct me if you remember. But yeah, it beat out a lot of other episodes people talk about, like things like Blink and the Empty Child Doctor Dances and The Parting of the Ways. Rose, like great episodes from this era. Well, Rose isn't obviously the two of the ones I said there aren't David Tennant episodes, but it certainly beat some episodes in various inter C9 voting processes. But we should say as well, Paul Cornell obviously wrote the book it's based on and wrote the 2-part episode. But Russell T Davies, who was showrunner at the time, did supposedly do a lot of like work with Paul on it. So he should get some credit as well, because you do sometimes get people saying like, Russell T could never have done this.
Yeah.
This is so different to the episodes he did, but it didn't really work. It doesn't really work like that on Doctor Who. Like, you kind of have to, the showrunner tends to get a bit of credit secretly, even if their name's not on it, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I don't know how much more there is to say about the 2 episodes. Like, they're just really good, it's just they're just really entertaining and dark and fun.
I think as well, series 3 is often underrated. I know a lot of people rate series 4 as one of the all-time best. Some people say series 5. I think series 3 maybe has one of the best sort of uninterrupted runs of episodes. If you think 100%. You've got, was it Human Nature, then Family of Blood, then is it Blink? Is that right? Blink, then Utopia, Sound of Drums, Last of the Time. I mean, that's an incredible run of episodes. I think series 3, I don't know if it's definitely my favourite series, but I think that's possibly my favourite run of episodes Doctor Who has ever done.
Yeah, no, that was such a fun and exciting time. I remember, like, I've always thought that it was just, I remember seeing, I think they did a mid-series trailer or something, and it was kind of like seeing, the Doctor as human, and then Captain Jack's running across, in Utopia, and then there's John Sim doing his like tapping thing with the gas mask on. Like, it was really cool and exciting. And it was a fun time. And I think these episodes kind of work the center of this series. And you're right, it is an underrated series. It's one of my favorite series. I think it has a lot of highs and a few lows, whereas I think other series are maybe a bit more consistent. But I think the highs in series 3 are really good. And, this 2-part episode is definitely at the center of that.
Yeah, and it does, just as the book was originally very well received, this story was very well received. Like you say, it topped our radiotimes.com poll. I know it's it's been in the top 10 twice, I think, of 2 different Doctor Who magazine polls. And it just kind of, it nails everything you want from a great Doctor Who story, I think, in that it has real emotion. As I said, it has those slightly more mature or complex themes for adult viewers, but then it has that kind of like classic Doctor Who iconography, that thing of like, a scarecrow has come to life, which is just a brilliant Doctor Who idea. It has it does things that the show's never done before, but also at the same time there are references to the show's history, because is it his John Smith's Journal of Impossible Things, which was the first time we ever really got a proper acknowledgement. And I know there was a school reunion which kind of said about the Doctor's past, but this was the first time we saw images, at least, of classic Doctors in the new series. So it had those little Easter eggs for fans as well. It really ticks all the boxes.
It's really, really great. I mean, we've sort of said that a few times, but just can't stress enough what a top episode we're dealing with here. So, I can see why people are happy to revisit it during these turbulent times. And, I think we can all relate slightly to, the Doctor trapped somewhere he's not expecting to be, unsure when he's going to be able to go back to normal life, and, with a mysterious force coming after him.
and I don't like pears either, so I can relate on that level.
That's true. There's something for everyone. There really is. Anyway, listen, thank you to everyone who's been listening. This has been our Doctor Who podcast here from radiotimes.com. If you do want to watch Human Nature and Family of Blood, there's going to be a watch along on Friday, the 24th? Mm-hmm. Friday the 24th of April, unless you're listening to us afterwards, in which case you can just watch it anyway for fun on BBC iPlayer or whatever your service is. And we'll be back with more Doctor Who podcasting next week. And there's, as ever, loads of Doctor Who content on radiotimes.com, so check that out. But before you do that, we're going to say goodbye. So it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And once again, thanks for listening.